Welcome to Bridges Conversations. This is a set of conversations on how Ignatian spirituality impacts our everyday lives. And this is our very first time going live on a Facebook live stream, so welcome to everyone who is tuning in. We're so happy to have you here. My name is Angela Pansella. I'm a fairly new face to most of you, I would imagine, because I'm participating in the Bridges Retreat this year. And this is Steve Givens. Would you like to introduce yourself, Steve?
Thank you, Angela. I'm Steve Givens. I am current and very new executive director of Bridges. I'm also a prayer companion, one of those people who helps others through the Bridges experience that we're going to talk a little bit about today. So I've been involved about 5 or 6 years now with the organization, and became the executive director just in January.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So we're going to be chatting today with Steve about his experience of Ignatian spirituality and how it informs his views on leadership, because it's a conversation that affects all of us, whatever kinds of times we lead formally or informally in our lives. But before we get into that, I know some of you are watching this live, so thank you for tuning in. And I encourage you to submit comments or questions as we go. We'll get to those at the end. We'll have a little conversation ahead of time. So just keep tuning in. We'll get to your questions as we go. But also, if you are watching this in replay, because some of you may see it that way, feel free to contribute comments whenever you watch, because I'm sure someone with Bridges will be getting back to you. So thanks for sharing this as well with anybody that you'd like to share it with that might want to get some more information about Bridges or Ignatian spirituality. So we've said all of that, and a lot of you are familiar with Bridges already, but for those who are not, Steve, what can you tell us about Bridges?
Well, thanks. Bridges is about a 30-year-old organization here in St. Louis, brought here by some wonderful folks in the back in the 80s, the Fellings and some of the folks who are the pioneers that I did have the opportunity to meet over the last few years. So I feel like I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, people who really have done pioneering work in bringing this experience to St. Louis. The Bridges Retreat is what is known as a 19th annotation retreat of the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius Loyola. So St. Ignatius created this, what's known in Jesuit circles as the long retreat, the 30-day retreat that all Jesuits go through a couple times during their lives. But even back in the 16th century, when Ignatius created this, he knew that not everyone, and maybe especially lay people, wouldn't have the ability to go off for 30 days and do this intense grouping of prayers and meditations and contemplations. So in his annotations to his writing on these spiritual exercises, he created the 19th annotation, which basically says, take what I've written and divide it up in different ways and make this as accessible as you can to people. So what we and others throughout the world really have done is created an 8 or 9 month retreat where you get the entirety of the spiritual exercises, but over that 8 or 9 month period. So for us, that means generally either weekly or monthly meetings with a small group of people. And also weekly meetings one-on-one with a prayer companion, like a spiritual director. And probably most important, a daily commitment to spend at least an hour a day in prayer with the spiritual exercises. So that is what we do as an organization. We do some other things in kind of follow up to the retreat after people go through that. But that's what the Bridges experience is like in St. Louis. And we have about between 25 and 30 people a year who do this retreat.
Well, and shout out to my prayer companion, Christy Hicks. That was a great find for me. How did you get involved with Bridges?
It's a good question. And I think I am a spiritual director, and I have my own spiritual director. And back in 2014 or 2015, in one of our conversations, spiritual directors are good at saying, how's everything going? How's your relationship with God going? What's missing? Those things. And as I was reflecting on that, I realized, at least at that time in my life, what was missing, or what seemed to be a little distant, was a closer relationship and walk with Jesus, with that person of the Trinity. And he just looked at me and said, you need to do Bridges. This is what Bridges is made for. It's to draw us closer to the person and to the divinity of Jesus. So it was through that suggestion, although I'd heard of it before. And so we have this saying within the Bridges community that sometimes you need to hear about the Bridges retreat 5 or 6 times from different people before you finally decide to do it, because it is a big commitment of time. Sure. And so I'm sure I've heard about it a number of times over the year. I'd read about it in a book or heard someone speak about it. And sometimes it takes a few times to hear about it before you kind of bite the bullet and say, I'm going to go do that. So,
right.
And when you do, what we hear from the people in our community is it's life-changing.
Mm-hmm. Well, we want to say hello again to folks who may be joining us as things go in Facebook land. It takes a little bit for folks to find videos sometimes. So if you're just joining us, again, my name is Angela. This is Steve. I'm talking with him about his experience with leadership in the Ignatian model. And we're just starting to get into that conversation. So be sure to add any comments or questions as we go, and we'll talk about them at the end. We'll probably in about 10 minutes or so. So Steve, tell me about what you've learned from Ignatius and the spiritual exercises about leadership.
Wow, so much, and the spiritual exercises, they're not, first of all, it's not a leadership training program. It's not, it's not, that's not what it's about. On the other hand, I think I learned so much from it about that I think affirmed my own leadership style. And I spent most of my career as an administrator at a university, leading, different size groups of people or big projects and that sort of thing. So I think on one hand, it was able to affirm for me that I was doing some things well. In some ways, I think it challenged me to consider how I might be better at those things. So, and I think we learned something at the very beginning of the spiritual exercises called the principle and foundation. And this is kind of the bedrock, the foundation that Ignatius thought we all ought to be working from. And there's some very simple ideas that God is God, and we are the creatures, not the creator, and that we're made to love, serve, and to praise this God. And that means we need to empty ourselves of our egos and of our desires that might be disordered and distracting us from God, and replace them with some open space that God can fill. And so, and then people, even if you're not all that familiar with Ignatian spirituality or the Jesuits, you may have heard the phrase, finding God in all things. That's a really important part of that bedrock, because when we can begin to see God at work in all different aspects of our life and all the different people that we come in contact with, we can begin to see those as more than just people. These are opportunities for us to see God. It's our opportunity to be God for others. And so we begin to pay a little bit more attention to our lives and how we interact with people. And of course, that affects, if we're in positions of leadership, that should affect how we do that. What is the spirit we bring to our leadership?
Well, talk a little bit more about that. So we've all encountered folks that are leaders, and we've all also encountered folks who are just in charge. So find some way to talk about the difference between being a leader and being in charge in what Ignatian style leadership really looks like.
Yeah. First of all, I think it's important to say that being a leader in this style doesn't mean by any means being a weak leader or a leader that just kind of, whatever you guys want, I think Ignatian leaders can still be very tough-minded, can still be very focused on getting things done right. But that purpose, that foundation that they're built on, is all based on love for each other, for God, for the church. It's all about working, what's best here for the common good. What's best for all of us in our organization, our corporation, our business, whatever it is. It's about, I think, leading with compassion for both the organization and the people within it. And compassion, means to suffer with. And not that we're all suffering all the time, but a lot of us are suffering. And so, are we able to be more aware of the people in our life who might be suffering in ways large and small? And how can we be the kind of leaders that will walk with them during that time? So I think this style of leadership is about nurturing. It's about encouraging, being very directive at times if that's what's necessary, but to have a gentleness about that. The way that, Jesus is really the model for this here,
Sure.
And so it becomes not so much about what happened as in any given situation, but as to how it was handled. And I think, how often do we hear that from our friends or our colleagues? This happened to me at work today. It wasn't so much what happened as the way it was handled. It could have been handled so much better, so much more humanely. And sometimes that just doesn't happen because the leader is so focused on checking a box and moving to the next thing. So I think it is about seeing that God is alive and at work in all the people that we come into contact with, and to never forget that, so it's about making those people feel needed and important and valued. And, we say that's Ignatius, but really that's just Christian. That's just, that's just Jesus,
So what kind of things could be little tips or concepts, and you've touched on them a bit, but feel free to reinforce that, like in our daily professional lives, whatever role we have, how can we incorporate that into our work?
I think, and this is something we all learn when we take the Bridges retreat, is setting that time aside for prayer. And when we say prayer, we mean a number of different things, and that's part of the beauty of the spiritual exercises. It's not about one kind of prayer. It's about you kind of get a whole new tool belt full of ways to pray. But I think for people who are very busy in their professional lives, especially, I think beginning our days with moments of silence and prayer, and kind of even looking over our day, having our calendar out in front of us and seeing the things that we have lined up for the day, thinking about what those challenges within those experiences might look like, and beginning to think, how can we approach those experiences with more love, with more of, aware that we are being Christ to those around us. And what does that responsibility look like? So I think first, kind of grounding our day in these moments of silence and prayer is really, really important. And, Jesus knew this. We see this over and over in Scripture, where Jesus goes off by himself or with a small group of his followers up on the mountain or out in the boat. He goes somewhere to get away from the crowds and to quiet down and speak with the Father, he says. And so if Jesus needed that, it's a pretty good assumption that we do too, So that ability to set that time aside is really, I think it's key. It sets our day. I think it's I try to have it be the first thing I do in the morning. And I'm retired from the career that I was in for 25 years. But I still try to get up every day and begin my day that way. And that's really helpful. And the bookend of that is, at the end of the day, Ignatius encourages us to examine how our day went.
Yeah.
How was our day today? How was our interaction with those in our lives? How do we feel about the movement of God in our lives? And that's a prayer called the examen, or the examination of consciousness.
Mm.
Next month on our show, we're going to have Father Mark McKenzie here. He's going to talk about that more. So I don't want to go into that too much, but it's a great tool at the end of the day to kind of review our day, take stock of where we are, and where God is in all that. So I think those two pieces of prayer prepare us for the work. So they're the times of not doing, but just being with God, so that we can go do the work, whatever that work is.
Great. This is very helpful. I really think that folks are going to get a lot out of the um, wondering about what that looks like in their own lives, as well as thinking through what it might look like. And I know we're going to be seeing some comments from some folks in a moment, so I will check in for that. But first, I have a question for myself that came up as we were talking. I think about, as we talk about leading as Jesus leads and this kind of servant leadership style, I wonder how you would address the comment, well, Jesus is perfect. How can we even relate to someone who is perfect in that?
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's always the challenge, right? But I think one of the things that we learned during the Bridges retreat, because the retreat is broken into what traditionally would have been 4 weeks, that made up those 30 days. In the way we set up the retreat, the second week, which is all about Jesus and his ministry and his healing, that second week takes, I think, 8 or 10 or 12 weeks. So it takes a while to get through that week. But what we learned during that time, and we're reminded, is that Jesus was fully human. He was fully human and fully divine. So he is this model for us. And it is a model that we can reach toward, because he was fully human during that time. And so, and I think it's also, if we remember, right up until his last days, Jesus was reminding us how important it is to serve others and to put others first. And so, it's no accident that he gave us both the sacrament of the Eucharist and the command to wash each other's feet and take care of each other on the same night. And I think those two things are our command as church and as Christians and as followers of Jesus, that we need that sacramental interaction with Jesus. We need that divine unity. But we also need to take care of each other. And so I think that is the model of ministry and care for each other that Jesus gives us and gives his disciples. We're the inheritance of that, and so it's pretty clear this is how he wants us to move and work in the world.
Thank you. We have a question from Matthew. He says, how can leaders rely on God's strength and not their own, while at the same time giving their all and doing their best, fully utilizing the gifts and talents they've been given?
Yeah,
that's a deep question there, Matthew. Thank you.
It is. So, there's actually a saying of Saint Ignatius that says, I always have to turn it around my mind, make sure I get it right. Work like everything depends on you, and pray like everything depends on God. And I think that's what we need to learn to do. Being a believer, having Jesus or Saint Ignatius as our model doesn't take any of the responsibility away from us to get things done. So it really is about, but it is about emptying ourselves a little bit. About we all have egos, and we all need enough of those egos to go out and do things in the world. If I didn't have some ego, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now. I wouldn't be able to muster the courage or whatever to sit here
Right.
and have this conversation.
Right.
But the most important thing to remember is that's all a gift.
Yeah.
And so we have this great prayer that comes as part of the spiritual exercises near the end called the Susape. Take, Lord, receive everything that I have. You've given all to me, now I return it. We have this command always to acknowledge those gifts and then to use those gifts. And that requires at times a little bit of emptying of ourselves so that we can let God work through us. And at times we have to make decisions sometimes about how we spend our time. So the question becomes, how does God want me to spend my time? You know, and but we still have to do the work. So I think it's being aware of those gifts, being aware of our what I would call a radical dependence on God. You know, not just, yeah, okay, God, it's good. We kind of need your help a little bit here. It's not that. It's I need you for everything that I do. You know, and again, I think that daily examen helps us to say, how do we do with that today? You know, were we depending too much on ourselves and our ability to get things done? And did we forget to bring Jesus into that equation?
Right.
Sometimes we get to the end of the day and we think, I'm exhausted and nothing went well. And then you think, well, did I invite Jesus into everything that I had going on today? And the answer might be, oh, yeah, I forgot.
Yeah.
Not that he's not always with us, of course, but I think that act of inviting him in reminds us that he is here with us in whatever it is we're facing on our professional life and our personal lives, our family lives.
Yeah, and speaking of the examen, that will be the next conversation that will be going on is with Father Mark McKenzie on Friday, April 16th. Marion had a question for me, actually. Angela, what have you learned about God, about yourself, while receiving the spiritual exercises thus far? Thank you, Marion. I've learned that I am resistant to daily prayer, but I'm also learning that the scriptures are incredibly deep well springs of reflection and contemplation. Always something new. And I've been, lifelong Catholic. I've been reading the scriptures a long time, but I find something new that I had not noticed before and that surprised me each time I really delve into them. So thank you for that, Marion. And Steve has asked, Steve Tadrick, is that how
I bet it is Steve Tadrick. Yeah.
He said, Jesus picked imperfect persons to carry on his ministry. His disciples were imperfect, so are we. But just like them, we are capable to lead. That feels like a really good place to end it, as we're want to thank Steve for his time today, and thank you everyone for watching. Again, please tune in when we talk with Father Mark McKenzie, when Steve actually talks to Father Mark McKenzie, because he will be your host. That's going to be Friday, April 16th at noon on Facebook Live on the Bridges Foundation page. Also, remember that you can always check bridgesfoundation.org for information on the retreat, on other Bridges programs. And again, feel free to share this video or any information about Bridges with friends. Remember, it takes a few times for folks to make that decision to be part of the retreat, so you might be able to help somebody along. And we wish you the best. I hope that you all have a great day. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Angela, for leading the discussion. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for those of you who are tuned in. And I am always accessible to executive.director@bridgesfoundation.org. Will get you right to me for an email. So if you have questions, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Angela.